Okay, this is a video on variation within species, section 1.3. Okay, you can go ahead and read this by pausing. The next few slides are going to describe certain words that are going to be used when they ask questions. I think the three words are going to be describe, explain, and identify. These all mean different things when you're being asked to do this on a test. So I encourage you to just kind of pause on these next few slides. I won't say anything, so you can just kind of pause on them and read what they have to say. So as was said earlier, as you all should know by now, is that the more diverse an ecosystem, the healthier it is. Okay? So healthy ecosystems have a great deal of genetic diversity among the species that live in them. The more diverse an ecosystem is, the more species it can support. Okay? So we have different kinds of ecosystems. We have ecosystems that are very diverse. We have ecosystems that are not as diverse. That is comparing biological diversity. Remember section 1.1, biodiversity. That's comparing biodiversity between ecosystems. But biologists also find that biodiversity occurs on a lower level as well. It occurs at the level of the species. And if you just look at this picture here, you can see very easily that there are variations among people. And just as there is variation among different people, right, of the same species, some are taller, some are shorter, some have black hair, some have blonde hair, etc. Right? Green eyes, blue eyes, blah blah blah, etc. etc. Okay. The same thing can be said of different species. So there are variations within magpies. There are variations within wolves. There are variations within bears. There are variations within snails. There are variations within beetles. There are variations um, um, eagles. There are variations within all sorts of species. So there you go. There's an example of how variation exists within snails. Okay, this variation occurring between individuals of a species is called variability, and it's an important if the environment of the species changes, and this is going to become the foundation, you guys, the foundation of understanding what natural selection is all about. And by understanding natural selection, you'll be well equipped to do well and understand what evolution is when it comes time to study that in either Biology 20 or Science 20. Okay, either one of those two courses, you're gonna find that being a topic. So again, variability allows the species to survive when there is an environmental change. That's critical to understand. So here's exactly what I'm talking about. In these pictures, we have some sort of factor, some sort of environmental factor changing. In the first picture there, we have a fire, a forest fire that's happening. In the second picture to the right, you have an increase in the temperature, a change in the environment. Likewise, it could be a decrease in the temperature. Here you have predator-prey relationship, which is an environmental factor, right? And here you have a big one that's implicated right now in terms of healthcare, and when people get sick is a pathogen. Okay, so if there weren't any sort of variation within species, then technically speaking, all members of a species would befall to any of these environmental changes, and that would wipe out an entire species. But that's not what happens. What happens is when you get an environmental change like this, like a forest fire, for example, okay, like a forest fire over here, or a dramatic change in temperature going up or going down, or you have, let's say, a predator-prey relationship, or maybe subject to some sort of pathogen, right? If there was no variation, then all the species would be wiped out. But the fact that there is variation allows some organisms to be fast enough to escape that predator, um, to develop structures that might resist burning, for example, although I don't think that's really too viable of an example, or develop structures that would help them survive in extreme climates, okay, and maybe that sort of thing would allow them to continue on with the species and be able to reproduce. That's a little bit about natural selection, which will be the topic in just a couple of slides. Okay, so when a species has a great deal of variation among its individuals, it's more likely that some of the individuals are going to be able to survive an environmental change. And when they survive the environmental change, those survivors can then reproduce and ensure the survival of the entire species that way. So here's an example of variation within a species. This is a picture, believe it or not, of a red fox. Yes, a red fox. That's the name given to this organism in terms of its genus and species. However, there are variabilities or variations within that species. There are different color coats. Some have a black coat, some have a silver coat, some have a brown coat. Okay, and that just ensures that if there's an environmental change, so for example, if you have a red fox, a bunch of red foxes, and all of a sudden there's an environmental change or they're forced to move to an area where there are dark rocks, then that means that the foxes that have the dark coat have an advantage now because they can hide and they can camouflage. If they can hide and they can camouflage, then their suspecting prey will not be able to detect them. And so that means that the fox that has the black coat can pounce on the prey, eat the prey, ensure their survivability, and reproduce to ensure the survivability of the entire species of red fox, even though we're talking about a fox with a black coat. I hope this is clear. If it's not, then you need to ask me questions in class. So you can go ahead and pause and read this slide. Just repeats everything I just said. Okay, I did not talk about this just yet, but this is antibiotic resistance. And antibiotic resistance works very much the same way, and it's natural selection happening at a very, very fast time frame. Because natural selection actually, in bigger organisms, bigger species, takes years and years and years and years to happen. But with bacteria, it literally happens within hours. So this is an example of a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. And Helicobacter pylori, the genus and species of the name, Helicobacter is designated by H period, and pylori is the species name. This is the bacteria that is responsible for causing ulcers. Back in the day, it was originally thought that ulcers were caused by the secretion of too much acid that would actually cause a breakdown of the stomach wall, but that's not the case. They actually found that it is because of bacteria. So often what they do now to treat people who have ulcers is they prescribe them antibiotics. Okay, I'm just going to abbreviate that AB. It's really hard to write with this pen. So antibiotics, right? The problem is that these organisms, right, just like people, just like bears, just like any other organisms, are going to have variations among them. So the problem is that most of the Helicobacter pylori are going to fall to the antibiotic. So if we take the antibiotic and we go ahead and we apply it, we give it to someone that has an ulcer, the antibiotic is going to kill the majority of the antibiotics. Sorry, not the antibiotics, but the bacteria. Okay, but every once in a while, it's going to encounter a bacteria that is resistant. It has that natural variation. It's already resistant. So if it's already resistant, right, that means if we take this bacteria, sorry, not the bacteria, the antibiotic, and we apply it to this organism, this bacteria, it will not work. Okay, it will not kill off. And so that means that this bacteria can now reproduce. And when it reproduces, it's going to reproduce a bunch of bacteria that are also resistant. So guess what? The antibiotic that we originally used to treat Helicobacter pylori infection, we tried again, and guess what? It doesn't work. And once that doesn't work, then you got a problem, because then you have this bacteria that keeps dividing and dividing and dividing, and then you get someone who gets really sick. So this is called natural selection. Okay. So if you think about it, let's pretend that you are the owner of a flower shop, and it's almost Valentine's Day. You know that the hot ticket item is going to be red roses. Okay. So what do you got to do? You got to be smart. You got to stock up on red roses so you can sell them and make money. But in order to do that, you need to cross-pollinate 2 other red roses to make more and more red roses in the next generation. So as you make more and more red roses, you get to sell more. That just makes sense. This is an example of artificial selection, because you have a human being that is on purpose, purposefully selecting traits that are beneficial. In this case, selecting the color red for roses so that this person can make money in their flower shop. Okay, that's artificial selection. It turns out that the environment can operate a lot like a person. Okay, but instead of being artificial selection, it's not artificial, it's natural, it's the environment. It's called natural selection. So it's as if the environment can select certain traits to be passed on to the next generation. What's an example of that? Well, I'll show you right now. Okay, so let's say we have zebra here. We've got zebra A and we've got zebra B. Okay, zebra A is unlucky. Okay, it's running and running, but you know what? The lion catches up to him and befalls him, and the next thing you know, the lion's got a meal. Okay, now this guy here was lucky because he was fast enough and he was able to get away from the lion. Okay, so this is an example of natural selection. Here we have a variation in the species, and the trait happens to be speed. Okay, let's say that's an example, speed. Maybe this one over here has more muscle mass and lean muscle mass, and is able to outrun this lion here, whereas this one has less, and that sort of thing, right? Anyway, this species then is selected against, whereas this one is selected for. So in the next generation, you would have faster zebras. Okay, and that's just what I just said here, so you can pause that. Okay, and this next few slides, you can read this on your own. This just describes a study of cliff birds, these swallow birds, that some of them were survived and others didn't. They wanted to find out why. And this is a picture of the bird. And what they did is they measured certain physical characteristics, and they found that the birds that survived had larger beaks, wings, and legs, and that they were larger, and they were also more symmetrical, meaning that both sides of their bodies looked more or less the same. This means that it would be easier for them to find food. That's symmetry and asymmetry there. So you can go ahead and read this. This is what they thought. Okay, and it turns out that they were supported. So the birds were selected for survival because they were able to store more energy and survive longer time. Okay, well, I hope that helps you in terms of getting a review of the concepts covered in section 1.3, in fact, and for the rest of all of section 1. Again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me. And there you go.